Hey everyone, Bryce here and welcome back to CD Superstars. Today I'm going to bring back something I did a while ago, but I think the time is right to do another one of these. It's another album ranking video. This is where I'm going to rank the studio albums of a particular band. And today we have one of my favorite progressive rock bands, and that of course is Genesis. Of course we all know Genesis, famous 70s progressive rock band with Peter Gabriel in lead vocals, Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks, Steve Hackett, and of course Phil Collins on drums. And I've always been a huge fan of this band, and I love pretty much all eras, well, except for one, but we'll get to that in a sec. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get this ranking going. Yeah, it's no surprise that at number 15 we have Calling All Stations, which was released in 1997, I think. It's the only album with Ray Wilson on lead vocals. Of course, Phil Collins left the band, and they had to bring Ray in. And yeah, it's last place for a reason. No faults to Ray Wilson. I think he's a decent singer, but the music itself just doesn't work. Aside from the first 3 songs, which of course is the title track, Congo and Shipwrecked, everything else is so boring. It's just, there's like nothing memorable at all in this. And it really shows just how integral Phil was when it was just him, Tony, and Mike, because at least Phil knows how to write a catchy hook. This has literally almost no hooks at all, and it's just so bland, and the album cover is kind of like, I don't get it. So yeah, it's number 15. Not a good album.
We're waiting for you. Come and join us now.
So it's kind of funny, we just talked about their last album, but now we're gonna head over to number 14, which is their first album. This is the first album they recorded. I believe it was recorded, I think it was 1969, 68. I think is when this came out. So Genesis had been going on longer than I thought. But this was kind of like a weird psychedelic pop album. It's far from what we know with Genesis today. What's funny about this album is that there's 2 drummers that played on this album. There's John Silver and Chris Stewart. Of course, this one has Anthony Phillips on guitar, and we all know Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford. But this is kind of a weird oddity in their catalog. It's definitely a band trying to find that sound, and they didn't really find it here. So a lot of people tend to dismiss this album. I think it's okay. It's not really an album I go back to. There's not too many memorable songs. The first track, When the Sour Turns to Sweet, I kind of like. The Silent Sun, which was a single, I like that as well. And The Wilderness is pretty good. Yeah, it's okay. It's not nothing spectacular, but it's okay. Okay, moving on, we have Genesis, or Shapes is what some people call this one. Yeah, this one's not really one of my favorites. This is not really an album I go to, almost not always. Of course, it has Mama, it's a great song. That's Always a big hit on here. Just a Job to Do is okay, but overall, yeah, it's okay. I know a lot of people do like this album because it has Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. Other than that, it's just not something I go to. It's kind of one where I'll put on, but it's kind of like, it's nice, it's nice. It's nice background music, but it's not really one I would really listen to in depth, because it's just there. After that, we have We Can't Dance. Now, funny enough, if you would have asked me like maybe 1 or 2 years ago, I might have put this album a little bit higher, because I do like the singles out here. No Son of Mine I like a lot. That's probably my favorite song on the album. Jesus, He Knows Me, Tell Me Why, and I'm gonna admit I do love ballads. I don't care if they're sappy. I like sappy ballads. So I liked Hold On My Heart and Since I Lost You. But as time's gone on, like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I can see why not meet people like this album. Especially some of the longer songs, Driving the Last Spike, or Dream While You Sleep, or the final track, Fading Lights. Like those songs are very long, and for this type of music, especially during this time, that really was not at all in what most people wanted to hear from Genesis, at least in this time period. And again, it's kind of the beginning of the CD age, so of course there's a lot of filler on this album. Never a Time is kind of like you could have done away with. You didn't really need that one. Way of the World, you can throw that away. Living Forever, like, yeah, it has a lot of filler. So nowadays it's not really an album I'll listen to in full. So that's why it's kind of a lot lower than how I originally had it, but it's still okay. I'll still kind of listen to it on a rare occasion. Alright, next up, And Then There Were Three. So this album took me the longest to kind of get into. I can't really explain. It probably might be because of this particular master or this issue, because the production is kind of like it's kind of thin in some spots, especially the first track, Down and Out, which a lot of people seem to like a lot. I think it's okay. Undertows, not bad. Snowbound is pretty good. Probably one of my favorite songs is The Lady Lies. I think that's a really good song. And of course it has the big hit Follow You Follow Me, which is a song that I listen to a lot. It's kind of the most played song on this album for me, because it's kind of like a nice little pop song. It's a nice little pop number. But yeah, album cover's kinda, I don't quite get it really, and the back cover doesn't really help either. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. Again, it's another okay album. It's not an album I'll be going after very often. It's just okay. After that, we have Abacab. Now this is kind of where, for most Genesis fans, this is where people stopped. Like they did not want to get into this album, because the band really starting to go more in that 80s pop direction. But that being said, I think Genesis does it really well. I think they do great pop. They had some great pop tunes in the 80s. I know a lot of Genesis fans don't like them, but I happened to grow up with Phil Collins. My mom's a huge Phil Collins fan, so I grew up with the Phil Collins era of Genesis, and so you'll see that more as we go on down the list. But going back to Abacab, there's some great songs in here, very memorable songs. Of course, it has the title track, which is a pretty interesting number. No Reply at All. I think that's a very underrated track. From what I heard, when they first played this live, people booed them for it. So that's why they never played it live again, which is kind of a shame, because I think it's a great number, because I love the horns on it. I love how it was arranged. Keep It Dark's another pretty popular song on the album. Who Done It? Man on the Corner is another good song. It kind of has a more somber, kind of very slow beginning, but then it starts to kind of pick up a little bit towards the end, which is great. But yeah, I think it's a good album. I think it's definitely worth a listen. If you're not a fan of 80s Genesis, then most likely not, but I dig it quite a bit. So that's Abacab. So now we get to Wuthering, which was the last album to feature Steve Hackett on guitar. Kind of like And Then There Were Three. This one took me quite a bit to get into. It's kind of a more, I wouldn't say ambient, but it's definitely more, has a more level approach. It's nothing too crazy or anything. It's just very pleasant sounding. That's probably a good way to put it. It's very pleasant sounding. A little side note, I think I really do love the album cover. I think it really does match the tone on the album. So going to the track listing, it has Eleventh Earl of Mar, which is a great start. It has a nice little guitar tone by Steve Hackett, which definitely sets the mood. On One for the Vine, Your Own Special Way, which was kind of a minor hit for the band, which I think is pretty good. It's almost gives hints on what's to come in the 80s, a little bit. A lot of the instrumental tracks, I'll admit, I'm not a huge fan of. I don't really listen to much instrumental tracks, but so I'm not a huge fan of What Gorillas, which is kind of a weird title to begin with. Blood on the Rooftops, which is another standout track. A lot of people seem to love that song. And of course, it ends off with Afterglow, which is a nice little finisher for the album. I think the more I listen to it, the more I'm starting to really appreciate it more and more. So hopefully, maybe this might go up in the future, but we'll see what happens. So that's Winning Wuthering. Funny enough, this was actually the first Genesis album I ever received. I didn't buy them. My mom bought this for me because at that point I didn't have a job. But this was kind of the first Genesis album I purchased. The reason why I bought this was because I had this probably hits number Misunderstanding, which I liked a lot. But album as a whole, again, I'll admit, when I got this album, I only knew Misunderstanding, so I wasn't that inclined to listen to the rest of the album. But as I've gotten older, I've really gone back to this album more, and I really think it's a really great album. To a lot of Genesis fans, this is probably considered their last great album, and probably the most proggy album in the 80s. And I can definitely see that because it definitely has a very prog format. Because the first three songs are kind of flow into each other. It starts off with Behind the Lines, which is a great song. Duchess is great. Man of Our Time, I really do like that song. I think that's one of Phil's strongest vocal performances on this album. Misunderstanding, of course, I already mentioned. Turn It On Again was another good hit for them. Really great drum beat by Phil. Alone Tonight, which was he wrote when he was going through a divorce, and that was a contender for Phil's debut album Face Value, which I think is great. And then it ends off with Duke's Travels and Duke's End, which again really kind of wraps the album up in a nice way. So yeah, Duke, great album. I recommend it. Alright, so we're finally back to some Peter Gabriel era Genesis, and now we have their second album, Trespass. Like a lot of us, we can say that this is kind of where Genesis really got their start, because it's now they're starting to get more experimental, and now it's becoming more in that progressive rock sound that we know from them. And this is the last album with Anthony Phillips on guitar. The album cover is kind of interesting. It's kind of like your typical but I think what made it a little bit better is that with the inclusion of the back cover, which has a knife on it. Again, kind of paying a little hint at the last song, The Knife, which we'll talk about in a sec. So the album starts off with Looking for Someone, which is a great beginning song, kind of really showcasing how the band really changed from their first. And then it goes to White Mountain, which is one of my favorite songs in the album. I love the atmosphere on that one. Visions of Angels, Stagnation, Dusk, and then it finally finishes off with The Knife, which is a killer track. And I will say, kind of a little side note, I think it's definitely better on the live album here. I think it sounds really good, but the studio album still sounds good as well. Okay, this next pick is probably going to cause a lot of Genesis elitists to come after my head, but I don't care. Yes, in number 6, we have Invisible Touch. Like I mentioned before, I grew up with Phil Collins. My mom was a big Phil Collins fan, and so I listened to a lot of Phil's solo work, and as well as the 80s Genesis. And this was definitely one of them. It's definitely their biggest album. Probably the biggest album. I think it went number 1 here in the States, I believe. And it's just a really great pop album. I mean, yeah, it's not progressive at all, really. I mean, aside from maybe Domino and the Brazilian, which are kind of have prog elements in it, but not really, not fully. But I think, but the songs here are really great 80s pop songs, and if you're a fan of 80s pop, then this is a great album. Starts right away with the title track, Invisible Touch, which I know a lot of people say they're sick of. It's kind of overplayed. I'm not sick of it yet. I still think it's a great song. Following that goes to Tonight, 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 which I do love the atmosphere of that song. I think the 80s keyboards really add to the overall feel of that song. I think it's great. Then it goes to Land of Confusion, which is like a really great 80s rock number. I really love that song. And then it goes to In Too Deep, which going to the ballad territory, but like I said, I don't mind ballads, so I don't have a problem with the song. I think it's a great ballad. After that is Anything She Does. Again, another very high energy 80s rock song. Then we get Domino, which is the longest song on the album, and this is kind of where it's the most prog-like. It starts out pretty mid-tempo, but then it starts to pick up on the second half. So I like that a lot. Throwing It All Away. Again, kind of another ballad, but I think it's great. And then it finishes off with Brazilian, which is a awesome instrumental. I love the keyboard, I love the drumming, and it's kind of a great mixture of the electric and the regular drums. I think it's a great mesh. And just overall, it just has a real epic sound to it. And I think it really closed out the album really good. So again, to a lot of people, this is probably the bane of most people's existence, but for me, it's number 6. So now we're approaching my top 5 Genesis albums. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. Tell me how you would rank these. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more videos in the future. At number 5, we have Nursery Cryme. Now this is where all the pieces came into place. This is the first album with Steve Hackett on guitar and Phil Collins on drums. And once you have all those 5 people, everything seems to work really well. Starts off with the musical box, great opening track. It's 10 minutes, but it's great. And then it goes for Absolute Friends, which interestingly enough, this actually has Phil Collins on vocals, which is kind of interesting. You have your new guy, your drummer no less, sing a song on an album. So that's kind of cool. Return of the Giant Hogweed, 7 Stones, Harold the Barrel's a fun song. Kind of a nice little, like, it's supposed to be like a comedic song, but of course I don't get it because I'm not British. But it's still fun. Then the album closes off with the Fountain of Salmacis, which is a great ending. Begins with a great little keyboard piece by Tony Banks, which is great. And yeah, I love it. The reason why it's not higher on the list is because it might be because of this particular remaster. The production's kind of mixed. Especially Peter Gabriel's vocals. I think on this particular master, his vocals are so low, it's sometimes hard to hear him sometimes, but the music itself is great. So again, it's still pretty high on the list, but it's just a little slight nitpick, but it's definitely essential. Alright, so now we got the big guns here. We have The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway at number 4. The epic concept album, which makes no fucking sense, but musically, it's outstanding. This is definitely probably for the Peter Gabriel era, this is definitely their peak. And interesting enough, it's the last album with Peter Gabriel on vocals. So backstory on this for me, it took me a long time to really appreciate the album as a whole, is because I only would listen to disc 1, which is probably has more of the more well-known songs on it. The second disc is kind of where it's a bit more experimental. It's kind of more avant-garde. Well, not avant-garde, but more definitely very, very out there. It really wasn't until I decided to really sit down and listen to this album in whole, which was kind of easy because at that point I was taking the bus to school. So it was like an hour drive, so I had plenty of time to listen to this whole album. And once it was all over, it all clicked. I understand now why this is such a renowned concept album. lyrically I still don't quite get it mostly, but that's kind of the, I guess that's kind of the charm of it. But definitely an essential album, probably not the best one to start off with if you're new to Genesis because of how dense it can be, but it's still really great. At number 3, we have Selling England by the Pound. Now this is probably the first album I'll give people if they've not listened to Genesis or in many cases the Peter Gabriel Genesis, because it kind of has everything you want to hear from Genesis. It has the great music. It has great music behind it. It has the quirky lyrics, and it's just a really well crafted, really well put together album. Starts off with Dancing with the Moonlit Night, great opening track. I Know What I Like, which was kind of a minor hit. First to Fifth, which is to a lot of people, including myself, is definitely one of the great standouts. Has a great grand piano being by Tony Banks, and a great guitar solo by Steve Hackett. More Fool Me, another song sung by Phil, which is nice. Nothing too spectacular, just kind of a little acoustic number. Battle of Epping Forest, the longest song on the album, and probably the strangest one on the album. From what I've heard, there wasn't supposed to be as much lyrics as it is, but Peter Gabriel decided to just write more on it, too much to Tony Banks' annoyance, but whatever. It's still a great song. After the Ordeal is a nice instrumental. The Cinema Show is one of my favorite songs on this one. I think it's pretty good. And it finishes off with the Isle of Plenty. Very British. If you're not British, you're probably not going to get any of the references, but it's still great nonetheless. So, essential Genesis album here. Make sure you get this one. At number 2, might be surprising to some, but I think this one's pretty well liked by among Genesis fans, and that, of course, I'm talking about Trick of the Tail, the first album with Phil Collins on the lead vocals, and he really hit it out of the park with this. I think it sounds great. Musically, it's fantastic. Starts off with Dance on the Volcano, great opening track, and then it goes to Entangled, which is kind of interesting because Dance on the Volcano is kind of a very upbeat, very driving song, but then you go into Entangled, which is a nice little, more quieter, acoustic-led number. I think which is another standout track. It's one of my favorites on the album. I love Entangled. Squonk, another very driving song, very Led Zeppelin inspired in terms of the drumming, according to Phil Collins. Madman Moon, I think that one's written by Tony Banks. You can kind of tell it has a nice little keyboard beginning. Robbery, Assault, and Battery is another great song. That's another one of my favorites on the album, because the chorus I just like the chorus of it. It's just so catchy, and Phil Collins' drumming on that is outstanding, especially that middle section. It's just great. Ripples was kind of a minor hit for them as well. I think it sounds great. I love it. Trick of the Tail, the title track. It's nice, short nice little kind of quirky song, which I like a lot. And then it finishes off with Los Endos, which is a great instrumental. But yeah, it's number 2 for a reason for me. It's fantastic. I listen to this one a lot. This one I go back to quite often. So if you're not a fan of Phil Collins Genesis, then I recommend you listen to this because it's fantastic. To some of you, this isn't so much of a shock, but for me, my favorite Genesis album of all time is, of course, Foxtrot. I just love that album cover, by the way. It's kind of strange because the fox lady, but I love it. I love it. I just love the artwork behind it. And if you open it up, get the full picture, just look at that. Now that's art right there. I love it. So the album begins with Watch for the Skies, which has a great opening Mellotron intro by Tony Banks. It's just really sets the tone, and then it gradually builds into the song itself, and it's just everything's great from that point on. Then it goes to Timetable, which is It's it's a shorter song, but it's great. I love Peter Gabriel's vocal delivery on that. I think that's probably one of my favorite songs on here. Get 'Em Out by Friday, another standout track by the band here. Can Utility at the Coastline. Probably another one of my favorites. I love how it begins. It starts out very soft, but then it really starts to build towards the end. You also get a nice little short acoustic number by Steve Hackett, which sounds very pleasant. But then you get to the last song. 22 minutes of progressive rock at its finest. Of course, I'm talking about Supper's Ready, the longest song on the album, and I think the longest song in their career. It's just everything you love about Genesis is in Supper's Ready. Again, lyrically, it's another song I don't really quite get, but besides that, it's just awesome. It's just really a stellar ending to this monster of an album. And the final, the last 2 minutes of the song is just very beautiful. I love it. So yes, this is my all-time favorite Genesis album for me. And yes, that is it. That is my ranking of every studio album by Genesis. Again, this is one of my all-time favorite bands. I love all eras except one, but it's just a band I go back to very often, and yeah, it's just fun talking about them. So in the comments below, don't forget to tell me how you would rank them, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and goodbye for now.